The worst regret isn't the mistakes you made, it's the moments you hesitated and did nothing. Because mistakes fade, but the what if never does. I want you to sit with that for a second, not just hear it, actually feel it. Because I think most of us walk around carrying this invisible weight, and we don't even have a name for it. We don't call it regret, we call it being realistic. We call it waiting for the right time. We call it being careful. But somewhere underneath all those reasonable-sounding words, it's just fear. And fear is a quiet thief. It doesn't break down your door. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits with you at the table every morning and whispers, "Not yet, not now, maybe later," and you listen. Because it sounds like wisdom. I learned this the hard way. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a slow accumulation of small ones. A conversation I never had, a door I stood in front of but never knocked on, a feeling I buried so deep I almost forgot it was there. Almost. I remember being 19. I had this idea. One of those ideas that lights you up from the inside when it first arrives. You know the feeling. That electric clarity where, for just a moment, you can actually see the version of yourself that acts on it. I used to sit at this corner table at a coffee shop near my apartment. Old wooden chair, scratched up. The kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and something slightly sweet. I'd open my notebook and I'd write things down. Plans, ideas, half-formed thoughts. And this one idea, it kept coming back. Every week, same table, same notebook. I didn't do anything with it. I told myself I needed more time, more preparation, more certainty. I told myself the idea needed to be fully developed before I could move on it. That I'd embarrass myself if I tried and failed publicly. That the people around me would see it and judge it, and I'd have nothing to show for it. So I waited. And I kept waiting. And eventually, I stopped writing it down. Not because it went away, but because seeing it on the page started to feel like a reminder of something I was already failing at. I buried the idea quietly. Told myself it probably wouldn't have worked anyway, but that's not what I actually believed. Here's the thing, nobody tells you when you're young, and overthinking everything. The longer you wait, the more your hesitation starts to feel like a character trait. It stops being, "I'm not ready yet," and starts being, "I'm someone who doesn't take chances." And once that identity settles in, it becomes the lens you see every new opportunity through. You don't even evaluate the new thing on its own merits anymore. You evaluate it through the filter of every time you backed down before. That's the compounding damage of inaction. It's not just the one moment you missed. It's the version of yourself you slowly become when missing moments becomes a pattern. And the scary part is how invisible it all is while it's happening. We like to believe that waiting protects us, that not choosing keeps our options open. But in reality, it slowly closes doors we don't even realize are shutting. You don't notice it at first, you just keep delaying, thinking there's always more time. Until one day, the opportunity is gone, and you're left with nothing but imagination. That last part is the part that gets me. Nothing but imagination. Because your imagination doesn't let you off easy. It doesn't show you the version where you tried and it didn't work out. It shows you the version where you tried and it did. Where you were brave enough and it paid off. Where you walked through the door instead of standing outside it rehearsing. That's the cruelest part of inaction regret. It doesn't give you peace by showing you failure. It haunts you with possibility. There's a distinction that I think about a lot. There are two kinds of regret in life. The first kind comes from action. From trying something, making a mistake, maybe getting hurt or embarrassing yourself or losing something you wanted. That kind of regret is painful, but it's workable. You can look at it, name it, understand what went wrong. You can extract something from it. A lesson, a recalibration, a story you can eventually tell. The second kind comes from inaction, from not trying, from silence when you should have spoken, from stillness when you should have moved. And this one is different in a way that's almost hard to articulate, because there's nothing to analyze. There's no sequence of events to trace back, no moment where you can say, here, this is where it went wrong. There's just the absence, the blank space where a choice should have lived. And the human mind doesn't know what to do with blank spaces, so it fills them with the most optimistic version of what could have been. A relationship that might have changed everything. A conversation that might have opened a door. A decision made 6 months earlier that might have put you somewhere completely different. You don't know. You can't know. And that unknowing, that's where the weight lives. I had a friend, someone I looked up to more than I probably ever told him, who was offered a position early in his career that scared him. Not because it was bad, because it was exactly what he wanted. And that kind of fear, the fear that comes from something actually mattering to you, is the most paralyzing kind. He turned it down, said he'd wait for the next one, said he wasn't ready, said the timing was off. There was no next one. Not like that. Years later, when we were sitting in his car outside a diner at 2 a.m, he told me, quietly, without drama, in the way people talk when they've stopped pretending, that he thinks about it almost every day. Not with bitterness, not with anger at anyone. Just this low, persistent ache. He said the hardest thing wasn't accepting that it was gone. The hardest thing was remembering exactly the moment he chose to let it go. And knowing that in that moment, he wasn't being responsible, he wasn't being wise, he was afraid, and he dressed the fear up in careful language and called it a decision. I've thought about that conversation more times than I can count, because I recognized something in what he was saying. Not the specific story, but the mechanics of it. The way fear disguises itself as reason. The way not now becomes never so gradually you almost don't notice. We talk a lot about the cost of failure. We've built an entire culture around fear of failure, movies about it, therapy for it, entire philosophies designed to help us become more comfortable with it. And that's valid. Failure is real, and it stings, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But I don't think we talk enough about the cost of not trying. Not the visible cost, the quiet one. The one that accrues in the background of your life like interest on a debt you forgot you had. Every time you don't make the call, the debt gets a little bigger. Every time you don't say what you mean, the distance between you and the life you want grows slightly wider. Every time you choose comfort over motion, you're not staying still, you're moving backward. Because time keeps moving forward regardless. And if you're not choosing, time is choosing for you. Not making a decision is still a decision. I think that's one of the most important things I've ever understood. We have this illusion that staying neutral keeps us safe. That by not committing, we preserve something. Some future flexibility, some sense that the door is still open. But the door has a hinge, and hinges rust. The version of you that exists in 5 years, that person is being built right now. In the choices you're making this week, in the conversations you're having or avoiding, in the things you're letting slide because today feels too inconvenient, or too uncertain, or too soon. 5 years from now, you is going to look back at this exact period, and either they're going to remember this as the time things started to shift, when something in you quietly decided to stop waiting for permission, or they're going to remember this as the time you stayed comfortable, stayed safe, stayed in the language of eventually, and watched another year pass without the movement it deserved. I'm not saying recklessness is wisdom. I'm not saying every impulse should be acted on or every risk is worth taking. Life requires discernment. Not all hesitation is fear. Sometimes waiting is genuinely the right move. But you know the difference. If you're being honest with yourself, and I think most of us are in the quiet moments, You know when you're waiting out of wisdom and when you're waiting out of fear. You can feel it in how the waiting sits in your body. Real patience feels settled. Fear-based waiting feels restless. It feels like something unfinished. I spent a long time believing that I was protecting myself by not fully committing to things, not fully going for it, keeping one foot in, one foot out. That way, if it didn't work, I hadn't really failed. I hadn't really tried. I had plausible deniability, even from myself. But what I was actually doing was guaranteeing a certain kind of outcome, not failure from trying, something worse, permanent ambiguity, the kind where you never know what was possible, where you spend years in the hallway instead of opening the door, and that's when it hits you. Doing nothing was the decision that cost you everything, not the attempt that fell short, not the risk that didn't pay off. The stillness, the silence, the moment you could have moved and didn't. I think the reason this kind of regret is so heavy is because it doesn't come with the consolation that failure brings. When you try something and it goes wrong, there's a strange dignity in it. You earned the lesson, you paid with something real, your time, your effort, your pride, and you walked away with something in return, even if it's just a clearer understanding of yourself. But when you don't try, there's no lesson, no earned clarity, just the question, looping quietly on itself. What if I had? And I don't think that question ever fully goes away. You can get busy enough to drown it out. You can fill your days with enough noise that you don't hear it for a while. But it waits. It's patient in a way you won't be. So what do you do with this? You start noticing the language you use with yourself. Eventually, someday, when the time is right, once I'm more prepared. Those words aren't neutral. They're the architecture, not just filler. They're the architecture of inaction. Every time you use them, you're reinforcing a pattern, teaching yourself that the threshold for movement hasn't been met yet, and the threshold never gets met when you keep raising it. You also start asking a different question. Most of us ask, what if I try this and it doesn't work? Start asking, what if I don't try this and I spend the next 10 years knowing I didn't? Feel the difference between those two questions. The first one is about protecting yourself from a specific pain. The second one is about respecting yourself enough to live without the permanent weight of a chance you let pass. I'm 25. I know that's young, and I hold that with some humility. I haven't lived everything yet, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But I've lived enough to know that the things that have stayed with me the longest, the ones that surface at 2 in the morning when everything goes quiet, aren't the times I went for it and fell short. They're the times I didn't go for it at all. And I think that's true for most people. The mistakes you make while trying something real, those become stories. They become the texture of a life that was actually lived. You can look someone in the eye and talk about them without flinching, but the things you never tried, those don't become stories. They become questions. And questions without answers have a way of outlasting everything. If there's one thing I want you to carry out of this, it's this. The risk of trying is visible. You can see it. You can feel it. It's concrete and specific, and your brain will present it to you in vivid detail as a reason to wait. But the cost of not trying is invisible at first. It hides in ordinary days, in routines that feel safe but slowly hollow, in the gap between who you are and who you know you're capable of being. That gap doesn't shrink on its own, and time doesn't create more opportunities just because you're not taking the current ones. At some point, you have to decide that the fear of living with the question is greater than the fear of trying and failing. At some point, the version of you that moved, that spoke up, that reached out, that started the thing, that said what was true, has to become more real to you than the version of you that waited. Because one of those versions gets to look back with something. and the other one just gets the question. Some regrets teach you, but the ones where you never even tried, those stay with you forever.